During the pre-dawn hours of Tuesday, June 6, 1944, a C-47 troop carrier transport from the 303rd Troop Carrier Squadron dropped a group of paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division in a field just to the north of the village of Hémevez. These men were from the headquarters company of the 1st Battalion, 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, and they had not landed on their assigned drop zone, but in a field 4 miles to the northwest. Once on the ground, they moved into a small wooded area nearby to wait for sunrise. Shortly after 6 a.m., a German patrol discovered them there, and after a brief but intense firefight, prisoners were taken. Those POWs were then marched half a mile to Chateau d'Hémevez, which was being used by the Germans as a supply headquarters at the time. At the Chateau, the Americans were interrogated for a few hours, and then, shortly before 8 a.m. on D-Day, 4 of them were returned to the woods and executed. A local man named Pierre Renaud saw them as they were marched down the road under guard. That afternoon, a civilian from the village found the bodies of the 4 men who had been executed just after 8 a.m., in addition to the bodies of 3 other men who had been beaten to death at the end of the battle at sunrise. The 7 bodies were then recovered from the woods and buried in the cemetery of the village's Église Notre-Dame. The next morning, the body of an 8th man, Private John KATONA of C Company 507th, was found at the end of the carriage road leading to the Chateau. He was buried in the cemetery near the others in the afternoon on June 7th. During the 10 days that followed, Hémevez remained occupied by the Germans as the U.S. Army's 7th Corps fought an intense maneuver battle to cut off the Cotentin Peninsula. Although located only 12 miles from Utah Beach, it wasn't until June 17th that U.S. forces reached the village. When they did, the mayor's assistant, Émile Lenné, turned over the dog tags and personal effects belonging to the 8 Americans buried in the church cemetery. He also told them that 4 of the paratroopers had been captured, disarmed, and executed. This revelation set in motion a process that ultimately resulted in this episode being documented in a unique way. Just 5 days later, on Thursday, June 22, 1944, a team from the U.S. 1st Army's Inspector General Division came to Hémevez. It included personnel from 7th Corps Headquarters, the 603rd Quartermaster Graves Registration Company, a translator, and 2 photographers from the 165th Signal Photographic Company, one shooting still images, the other shooting motion picture footage. Since a war crime had been reported, the photographers were there to document every step of the investigation. They went first to the woods where the brief firefight and the executions took place during the morning of June 6th. Once there, a thorough search was conducted of the entire area by soldiers from the Graves Registration Company, a search that quickly identified the exact spot where each of the 7 paratroopers fell. They then marked each spot with pages from a pocket notebook. A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And the motion picture camera operator, Sergeant Thomas J. Maloney of the 165th Signal Photographic Company, filmed it all. Then, using soldiers from the 1st Army as stand-ins, they staged a reenactment of the scene that Pierre Renaud witnessed shortly before 8 a.m. on D-Day, when 4 German executioners marched Private Robert E. Werner, Private Delmar C. McElhaney, PFC Elsworth M. Heck, and Private Anthony J. HITZTALER through the cattle gate and across the field to the woods where they would be murdered. From there, the investigative team moved into the cemetery to recover the bodies, and Sergeant Maloney continued filming. The footage he captured during this stage of the investigation is graphic, and it may not be suitable for the faint of heart or appropriate for younger viewers. If you would prefer not to see it, you should stop watching this video now. The team started with the single grave of John KATONA, the C Company 507th paratrooper who was killed in combat elsewhere and later brought to Hémevez. After uncovering his body, it was removed from the temporary grave that the French prepared for it on June 7th. It was then placed on a stretcher so that it could be examined by Colonel Rosser L. Hunter, 1st Army Inspector General. Colonel Hunter is seen here on the left, next to Captain Theodore F. Wright, U.S. Army Medical Corps. The footage of KATONA's body clearly shows an 82nd Airborne Division patch on the left shoulder of his M42 jump jacket. After that, the team excavated the mass grave containing the remains of the 7 paratroopers from Headquarters Company of the 1st Battalion, 507th, who were buried during the evening of June 6th. Since there had been no time to build proper caskets, the French simply laid the bodies at the bottom of the hole, inserted 3 cross beams, and then covered them over with wooden planks. One by one, the bodies were exhumed, placed on stretchers, and closely examined by Captain Wright. Every man's wounds were then recorded in close detail. PFC Daniel TILLMAN, Private Robert Werner, who was shot in the right cheek by a bullet that produced a large exit wound in his forehead. Private Anthony J. HITZTALER, who was shot in the nape of the neck. The wound to Delmar McElhaney's head was so gruesome that the French covered his face with a handkerchief when they moved him from the woods to the church cemetery. That handkerchief was still present when his body was exhumed, and it covered a massive exit wound just above his left ear, and the entry wound behind his right ear from the bullet that caused it. Private Robert G. Watson, one of the paratroopers injured during the jump on D-Day, was found to have a cranial crush wound behind his left ear from being beaten by his murderer's rifle butt while collapsed face down in the woods. PFC Elsworth M was shot behind the right ear as well, and the wound was pointed out for the camera in this clip using an M3 trench knife. The body of the final victim was the focus of special interest because of the extensive wounds it received at the hands of the enemy. Pierre Renault, seen at left in this shot, provided an eyewitness description for Colonel Hunter through his translator. Monsieur Renault was especially animated in his description of recovering the body of Private Andrew KLING, who suffered a gunshot wound under the left shoulder blade, a bayonet wound in the chest, and a devastating cranial wound. With the work of examining the 8 bodies at an end, they were carried out of the church cemetery on stretchers, one after the other. Then they were placed on a truck and trailer belonging to the 603rd Quartermaster Graves Registration Company and driven 10 miles to the village of St. Mère-Église, where they were buried in the first of 2 temporary U.S. military cemeteries located there. The American paratroopers, who were buried in Hémevez for 16 days in June 1944, came to France that summer to advance the cause of liberation, and they're remembered there to this day with a simple memorial in the church cemetery that reads, "To the memory of 7 American paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division who were executed in this community on June 6, 1944.